How to meaningfully inhabit a space. How to weave ourselves into a new territory. To think the project of human inhabitation in present times. The initial impulse for this season of Woods in the Sound is a personal, collective journey. A journey of foresta to become a real forest. Our search for spaces of the possible, to say it with Isabel Stengers, a search for making a home for a multispecies collective. So what can we learn from vernacular, contemporary, and emerging knowledges of spatial practices, as well as multilingual situated dialogues? Can architecture support multispecies conviviality? This season unfolds as a relational research as necessity, becoming a context for a collective sense-making, seeking vocabularies and articulating ideas that may enact ecologies of practice in our search for more inclusive and regenerative inhabitation.
In this episode, we are looking at ways in which architectural and design practices are paying attention to the questions of inclusion or exclusion of multispecies communities from human spaces, questioning the anthropocentric constitution of architecture, while being co-responsible for the destruction of multispecies habitats and contributing to the ecological crisis.
In the first episode of this season, we began thinking of a planet as a garden. Could we now envision constructing livable spaces for many, not only ourselves, as perhaps a habitable multi-species forest? And learning from forests, if relationality would become the focus in architecture, how would we design? How would we build for cohabitation and potentially include other beings as co-designers and cohabitants? How would we then co-design for contact zones, for complex relations, for a thriving coexistence?
One of the things that I've been thinking about is the difference between sensitizing ourselves to other kinds of life and actually trying to represent other kinds of life in our planning, so to speak, in our designs. In a way, if we're going anywhere to make our habitat, it's that negotiation about how far certain species are enabled to flourish, like putting up beautiful forests that allow bird life to feed, that bring butterflies back and things like that, and how far that's not labor that you can engage in. So it feels to me that we're always in this entangled world where we can make our spaces as friendly as possible, but that would then be our job, would just be to make those spaces work for others as well as ourselves. And that homemaking for everybody would be the job. And if that's the job, how are you also sustaining yourself? Are you able to plant the materials that you need to build, to eat, to shelter in a way that's not disruptive, but at the same time, are you able to build the materials that others need for food and shelter so that you are actually making a home for everybody?
It's a house that it's reacting to a long process of flattening of the land in Murcia, in Molina de Segura, that was prompted by mass urbanization that was trying to maximize the benefit and the speed of urbanization and the benefit for developers rather than actually thinking of ways for human life to be making the best of its entanglement with others. And as a result of that, a very important part of the landscape, which is the ravines, the ramblas, which are these veins that are carved by fast rainfall and that erodes the topography, but produces kind of carved veins where water accumulates and biodiversity grows, and is and survives across the year, so that biodiversity is kept as part of a very dry ecosystem. But through the flattening of the land, these ravines all gain discontinuity. So a big part of the ravines were destroyed, and therefore the rest of the ravine often did not get the water. And so they died, and or their biodiversity dropped very rapidly. And that also produced a process of erosion, and that ended up reducing the complexity of the entire ecosystem. It's not possible to repair it by bringing it to a previous state of what it used to be, let's say. And there's no need that nostalgia of bringing things to a idealized past. It's not really what we're looking for, but rather to find a way to re-establish the complexity of the ravines, and in particular how they were forms of collective mutual support of very different and very heterogeneous forms of life. And in order to do that, we had some capacities that were coming from domesticity. Domesticity, human domesticity, is a side of mobilization of resources, like, for instance, electricity and power, but also gray water that is coming from the routines of hygiene among humans, and also the capacity of the actual buildings to collect rainfall. And by combining all these things and transforming the way people in the house would be relating to water and to soap and to many other things, we ended up having this possibility of mobilizing water to reactivate or reestablish the life complexity of an abandoned and dying piece of ravine. And we do that automatically, so there's some sensors within the land, and when the acidity of the land increases, meaning that it's drying to a level that is jeopardizing the life of the plants, and therefore insects, therefore fungi, and bacteria within the land, then the water that is accumulated from this rainfall and gray waters that are collected in a very simple tank are sprayed through a climatic or artificial climate, so that the humidity within the land is brought back to levels where the survivance of its ecology can be sustained. And that's produced a very fast, I would say, reactivation or eco-activation of the ravine, that it's of course affecting the life of the humans there, or it's part of the life of the humans there that expands into the insects, the fungi, the bacteria, the plants, the animals, everything that is part of that, the air. And that's kind of the complexity of the work that we do at the Office of Political Innovation. I'm very excited of what it allows us to deal with.
It's also something that we have a society or humanity have to solve in a lot of different levels and layers, such as sustainability is, right. In our modern times, it was the exploitation of our environment, the exploitation of our earth, and I think this worked if the amount of human beings is small enough, right? So that the earth, the environment can regenerate. But I think we've way past this point, and I think we have to now find a way to cooperate. And all these buzzwords, resilience and sustainability, right? They're stretched, but I think the thought behind is really still important, right? We cannot consume our earth as we did before. We have to find a way, while consuming it, also regenerating it in a way.
Regenerative design is beyond sustainability, not doing just things less bad, but trying to leave a positive footprint, to enrich the living world, and not only to make less damage to the living world, contributing to solving the conflict between either building or nature. A living architecture, or we call it a Baubotanic, is an amalgamation of building and trees that both exist at the same place and the same time, to speak broadly. Specifically, we use trees, living trees, as an integral parts of our architectural design of buildings, structures. Trees can become, in the very advanced way, part of the load-bearing structure of building, or they can become part of the facade system, for example. Anyhow, they make up the space. They contribute to the living qualities of the humans, for example, by shading, by creating a microclimate, but they also are part of the larger ecosystem, for example, by cooling down the environment, and also offering a habitat for non-human species that are inhabiting our structures.
Der Pavillon war zunächst ein Projekt mit einigen Freunden. Wir haben dann damals den Boden gepflastert und die Platanen gepflanzt und die Tische gestellt. Und eigentlich sollte es eine ungefähr ovale, also längsovale Form geben aus Stahl, in die ein Dach eingespannt ist und die mit den Pflanzen verbunden wird, aber in der Hinsicht, dass die Pflanzen an diese Konstruktion angeschraubt werden. Und dann blieb es aus verschiedenen Gründen einige Jahre liegen, und bis wir dann weitergemacht haben, beziehungsweise bis dann Ferdi auch in das Projekt eingestiegen ist und wir ein Studentenprojekt gemacht haben mit verschiedenen Entwurfsphasen. Bis dahin waren die Platanen schon sehr eigenständig und jede wuchs eigentlich ein bisschen in eine andere Richtung und hatte oben ein bisschen eine andere Form. Und dann war nicht mehr dran zu denken, diese kräftigeren Bäume an eine theoretische Konstruktion anzuschrauben, sondern dann ging es darum, und das ist das Innovative, dass die Konstruktion den Bäumen folgt.
We kind of negotiate with the trees as our partners. For sure, that is not everything in Baubotanic is harmonic in the sense. Yeah, so we also are provocative in terms of how we deal with trees. We are sometimes criticized even for that we use screws for connecting trees with each other, or with technical elements and so on. And this is very it is not that we are kind of only very soft. We also have a kind of harsh interaction sometimes with the living entities. In our opinion, this is based on a respect for the different forms of life and patterns of life we can find in the different forms of beings. So or organisms. So a tree is not a human, is not an animal. It's a plant. That is not meaning that it's worth less or something, not at all, but it is immobile. Yeah, it cannot walk away. Yeah, and that is why trees have adapted to very harsh environments because they could not escape. When we are affected by a thunderstorm as humans, we always try to escape. Yeah, we go into a house or something. Yeah, we protect ourselves by moving. Trees can't, and that's why they are damaged. Yeah, strong storms, they break off branches and so on, and trees need to regenerate themselves. Yeah, by rooting, for example, by creating a new branch. And healing the wound that is created by a hailstorm, for example. And these phenomena of adaptation and regeneration of trees, we try to translate in a regenerative form of architecture by actively triggering those reactions and making use of them. If you imagine a city or a quarter of a city with buildings that are at the same time trees, the city becomes an agglomeration of these inhabitable trees, and by this is becoming an inhabitable forest. So something where we are really living in, where we are fulfilling our needs, but which also is part of the natural ecosystem around us, which is an ever-changing concept and process of being engaged with the growth of trees, with the challenges, but also for sure very much with the benefits they can provide to us.
Zumindest hierher gegangen ist, und das wurde nochmal erklärt von Herrn Schönle, dem Kollegen von Herrn Ludwig. Und da waren die Anwesenden ganz begeistert und haben gesagt, sie würden gerne hier eine Veranstaltung stattfinden lassen. Letztlich sind diese Stahlstifte hier der entscheidende Punkt. Hier liegt dann diese Plattform, auf der wir uns jetzt gerade befinden, liegt dann hier auf diesen Pflanzen auf, verwächst dann mit dem Baum, also der Baum verwächst mit diesem Stahlträger und trägt dann eben diese Ebene hier. Nachher werden Ziel ist es nachher die Träger rauszunehmen und diese Träger rauszunehmen. Das ist nachher das Ziel. Und ich habe dann noch die Treppe, ich habe die Plattform 1 und die Plattform 2 und sogar noch die dritte, genau, also 3 Plattformen. Komme über die Treppen dann hoch, aber habe eben diese Träger nicht mehr. Die Tragfunktion übernimmt dann die Pflanze, die eben mit diesen Stahlstiften hier dann verwachsen und verbunden ist. Sie sind ja relativ vielfältig, Sie machen ja viele unterschiedliche Themen. Okay. Das ist der... Ja.
I'm part of the so-called Ecolopes project, ecological building envelopes, which is another thing that partly interrelates with the biobotanic approach and partly is separated from this, where we try to understand the facades as a three-dimensional space that surrounds buildings, as a space of interaction between the indoor and outdoor inhabitants that meet in this area, in this space. And we actually try to develop design technologies. For example, we can now have the first approaches to model the behavior of certain species or groups of species, plants and animals, and we can give some forecasts if they would settle in a building or not, and under which conditions, and how we have to change our design that we are attractive for certain animals and not for others. Yeah, so this is something we currently do not do in architecture. Very often things like multispecies design comes as an add-on, like a facade greening or a green roof or some microhabitats that are added to a final design. And this is a huge shift in perspective, a paradigm shift that we think we have to consider the non-human stakeholders from the very beginning onwards, and we have to develop design tools that are as sophisticated as the ones we have established for us, for our human needs, also for the needs of non-human species that are inhabiting our built environment.
How the needs of animals and in their full life cycle, that's very important. Not just the need for food or for breeding places, but the full life cycle could be integrated into a design approach, and that we called animal-aided design. And then we developed then different tools to to identify the regional species pool, because we're not in a zoo, so we're not taking animals and bringing them somewhere, so we are working with the animals that are there, and you have to have a method to know which animals are there, so that's what we did. Then the other point is that the animals have to be able to reach a planning site by their own, because we are, as I said, not in a zoo, so we are not bringing them there, so we're only developing an infrastructure that they should use by themselves, so they have to be able to get to a site and to also get away, so that the populations can also get in contact with each other. This is called ecological connectivity. Then you have to include them and into design, and this is, let's say, the core of animal-aided design, so that you really find a design language and also sensibility to include these needs into your design decisions as an architect or a landscape architect.
The concept of device is what I used to think these inclusions and exclusions, to think hospitality and hostility. The word device comes, the etymology is something that divides. We can think of a door handle, right? By designing a door handle, let's say a traditional door handle on a regular door, in the most traditional sense, maybe this is an artifact made of metal. Then we have, some inscriptions, some, partitions, some kind of organization of the world. This is kind of the inclusions and exclusions that I talk about. This is how the device divides and organizes the world. So, for example, the door handle will be placed at a particular height. It will require certain strength, for me to do a movement and to pull and to push and so on. All of these, are inscriptions that we do through the design. So most of these door handles then are designed for people like me that are strong enough to move hands, that would have a hand to begin with, that would have the right height, to be able to reach it and so on. So these are inclusions and exclusions. So it includes me that are strong enough, to be able to do these movements. And it will exclude babies and butterflies and squirrels and many others, right? People without hands and so on. So each of these things, whatever we design, create inclusions and exclusions. So to what extent are we including some and excluding others? Can we make this more inclusive than exclusive or excluding? And can we bring, not only more people, but also other, than humans, in these inclusions?
What is important that we are getting involved quite early, so that we can really also work on influence the urban design or the layout, to optimize that. And because we're starting with this, we call it target species negotiation process, so we are agreeing together on the target species, and our idea is that if we are on the building level now, that the investors or the housing association or whoever, they are taking responsibility then for these animals. This could be, 3 or 20 species. And so this is really, that's important for us, that they say, okay, we want to give habitat for this species and we are responsible now for them in the long term. And this is for us, this commitment, this is for us the point where we say yes or no. If it's just maybe just a bee hotel, but only the hotel, and we don't care about what the bees are feeding from, and so this is a no-go for us. So because it will not work, it's an empty symbol then. Urban spaces, they have really a highly controlled environment, and this comes from also when urbanization started. One main issue was pest control and control of viruses and bacteria and so on. Our idea with animal-aided design is not to to let control go, but to give more space for dynamic processes. So we're doing a lot of vegetation planning. That's very, very important. This could be on the roof or in the gardens or in the open spaces. It's absolutely necessary because you really need biomass. Biomass is the main food resource for the whole trophic chain, or the trophic level. So yeah, you need biomass by plants, then insects are eating them and birds are eating them and the birds are eating the insects and so on. So this is the foundation for everything, that you have really biomass but also specific vegetation, because many animals are specialized on specific plants. And this is very, very important to have that. You could, sometimes parallels are fruitful. You can think about barrier-free planning for also non-human species. Yeah, they also have to move in the city, but they're moving very differently. Some are flying, some are crawling, some are running. And so you have to think about these different movement modes. So yeah, for a hedgehog it's 20 centimeter barrier or 30. For a bird it's clear not, but birds have other barriers. For example, light or glass is a big issue in the city. So risk of birds are flying against glass, so this is a barrier for birds, and we have very high numbers of birds dying every year. For example, in Germany it's around 100 million birds every year. Or bats and also migratory birds have problems with light pollution. This is also a big issue. And so this is also about barriers and to keep the city open for movement of different species. We are expanding species protection and nature preservation. Nature preservation in most European countries it's like building preservation. You try to preserve the species that are already there. And so only if something happens that endangers them or takes away habitat, then nature preservation and species preservation is getting active. But what we are doing is to create more habitat, to extend possibilities for species. So that's the pragmatic level. And the more ethical, theoretical is that we see animals as stakeholders, so that they have a right to get included in the planning process because they are already living there as we do. And their interests or their needs we can't ignore, and so they are stakeholders of what's going on in the world, and they're stakeholders of land use changes, and we have to address their interests and needs in the planning processes, because this is it's a question of justice, of multi-species justice, let's say it like that.
All these approaches we can sum up under the headline of a gardening-based architecture. That that's a creative process of managing the development of coexistence, very broadly speaking. That also means harsh decisions in terms of some species that might be kicked out, might even be killed at some point, and fostering others, fertilizing certain plants, watering them, ripping out others, and so on. I think that is something we really have to understand. And this is not only a human thing. We know this from ants, for example, that are also kind of gardening. We even know this from elephants in forests, that they kind of manage the forest to their benefit. So this is something we have to do, and we have to cultivate for in light of the upcoming challenges ahead of us.
Contemplating dwelling spaces in a broader sense, how do we extend awareness not only towards those voluntary animals, but also to other animals' neighbors who never chose to come? A zoo. This forced home to fauna that have been uprooted and imported into city spaces has become a powerful image to address colonial narratives and man-made corridors, while also pointing to the present-day repercussions of these historical movements.
It stays weird to design animal enclosures. So I think the lions are not in yet, but so you have two lions really like to be high up. So we deliberately made this like higher area for them to have a look over their territory and beyond, of course.
And where is that?
This is in Artes, in Amsterdam Zoo. It's, I think, still pretty small, but it offers quite a lot of possibilities to behave more natural. And there's like different climbing options, different routings. You see that they used to live in a total shitty place. It was really small. You can still argue whether this is enough or good, but you see that they behave completely differently now, also between each other. So it's quite interesting to see.
Yeah, that's interesting. This is like this idea that the environment actually determines your behavior, right? Whether you are a human, animal, or...
Yeah. And when a zoo asks you to design a landscape for their animals, they always, one of the first things that the animal should be able to perform its natural behavior. But what is natural in the city center of Amsterdam? So there's always this kind of, you have to kind of rethink what is not so much maybe natural. Well, natural is to adapt, of course. It is natural when they adapt to a different circumstances. So then it's often, to me, it's about affordances in an enclosure. How can an animal relate to its place, although it's confined to it, but can it build a relation? Can it find corners that are really like good, to feel good? So you need to offer a lot of choice, basically. And as soon as you can pick your chair, your preferred chair, you feel much better in a room. And it's the same for them, of course. So if you think as a designer, this is the rock, you're gonna sit here because that's the perfect rock, then it's gonna go wrong. Because they will choose another rock, and that will be a lousy rock then. So it's very much about offering choice within the limitations of an enclosure. And I think we have a small enclosure, but there is quite a lot of choice in it, which is I think making them more relaxed and finding their own space and place, and also starting to defend, and they're making these scent marks and communicating like differently because they don't see each other all the time anymore. And it's kind of good to see. They lost a lot of weight. That you see their ribbons now, they got really like more. I'm a bit afraid that they become too wild and now.
So actually it's not only about space, I mean it is also about space, but it's mostly about what can they actually do there. So how diversified is the space and how...
Very much. It's always, there's always the focus on it's too small. And of course it is too small, but what is there? Can you relate to it? Can you find your food there? Can you make a territory? Can you develop yourself, basically? Can you know? Is there something to know at all? Because if it's like a bear cave or a bear pen, then there's not so much to know. I think it's very much about the richness of the place and the possibility that the place gives to relate, because you can like paint a rainforest in an orang-utang enclosure on the wall, and it will give a nice scenery maybe for visitors, but it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't live, it doesn't change, you can't eat it, you can't tear it down. So what is really like triggering behavior, and then you will see that there will be a kind of a new natural behavior or something that is kind of relevant in this circumstances. And that's nice, because then you see an animal that is kind of doing its thing. Although it's in captivity, it's still having kind of a maybe sort of meaningful day. In the zoo, of course, it's like a focal point of contradictions and problematic situations. But it makes it also very interesting because they become present there. And if you ride through Amsterdam, you see all the kennel houses. They're just as problematic colonial-wise as the zoo. Nobody questions where it comes from. And in the zoo, you can maybe more literally ask the question, okay, first of all, how do I feel looking at a lion in captivity here? Almost everybody has a double feeling to it. On the one hand, it's quite impressive to see this huge animal, and at the same time, can we look it up? And I think almost everybody has that feeling, and it's interesting because you question whether it's right. The fact that you can feel this like ambiguity in yourself is, I think, a feeling that we lack very much in society. To maybe both like it and dislike it, and not maybe necessarily having an opinion on whether it should stay or not. It's there, and it helps you realize that you live in a world with complexities. I also started this kind of platform, the Zoo of the Future, with some friends, to investigate what possible other zoos could you envisage. So indeed, is there a zoo possible where maybe this anthropocentric stand is less present? So we thought, can you make like a voluntary zoo where both the animals and people come on a voluntary basis?
As I was working with the arts group Furtherfield in London, who were looking at the future of a park, but their way of encountering the park was to say, not only are there human users, but there are a number of animal and plant users in the park. And what does it look like if, instead of just assuming that the governance of the park for the future is decided by humans, what would happen if geese and stag beetles and plane trees and I think there were 7 different species in the end, all came together and navigated the future of the park from, obviously we're all being human in taking these roles, but actually trying to put ourselves into relation with the park with a completely different kind of physicality, a different kind of emotion. What does it feel like? And so we had the fascinating experience. I mean, I was playing grass, which made me realize that grass is actually really quite colonial. It just goes everywhere. But that I was walking along with 2 stag beetles who were kind of, although obviously they were human beings, being stag beetles, really looking at the degree of cover there was, for instance, within the park, and how insects were supported in thriving or not thriving by something as monocultural as a lot of kind of short grass, and how vulnerable they felt. And those sorts of moments are both practical, but they are also kind of really out of this world for the people performing them. So afterwards, when we're talking about this kind of thing, it's really interesting to kind of deconstruct the experience you've just had. And we had all these dogs, and they're all running around, and squirrels shooting around the place. And then we had trees who kind of going like, why are we even moving? We don't move. What's this about? You know, so this sort of really different sense of the world, and a kind of sense of one's own body and how it is to be in the world. And all of this enabled through something that just took us out of our normal being and put us into something else. And I hesitate to use the word empathy, because I know I don't know anything about being grass. I mean, just because I understand more about how grass manifests now does not mean that I can tell you about the world of grass. So I'm really careful as a researcher not to overclaim about any of this. It's very much a sensitizing process for humans. So it's kind of on the philosophical level, the embodied level, the political level. It's just such an interesting project for us to think with. So that's one example of actually how we played with both the more than human and the idea of how futures could be thought through really differently, and how arts practice has contributed to that.
When I advise in nature inclusive building, it's much more about seeing the building as a system in itself, but also as part of a very much larger system. And the nice thing about that is that you can then create stories, like you create a story about a family who is bringing the kids to the children care and then doing the groceries there and having a dinner at it. So you have these stories about how to live, and you have those same stories for animals, or at least you can make them up. And they're probably not always right, but at least thinking about them offers a much richer environment. So I'd like to, if it's about cohabitation, then it's really about cohabitation. It's not animals living with us, but it's like we're living in this building all together. And it means that it's very nice, but well, that the kids have to go to bed when the bat comes out of its box. So, oh, the bat's out of his box. No, you have to go to bed now. So, like these, that there's relations between it. It's not just that you serve them both, but that there's also kind of really cohabitation, being aware of each other, which I like, because I like to meet all those animals in the city and like fantasize about how they live and go about in their lives, why they're here, how they make their decisions. And that you need to know a bit about the species, of course, but you also need to speculate. So it's kind of educated speculation, you could say, but still you have to fantasize. I think that's also the fun part of it.
And would you say that kind of empathy is the beginning kind of this, or not necessarily?
Yeah, of course, empathy. We empathy comes with knowledge or with a connection. So you can't have empathy for an animal that you have never seen or met. I think I was asked to represent the eel in Amsterdam in the municipality. So if we make changes, if we renovate the quays or the canals, okay, what would the eel like? So I was asked to kind of come up with how do you say, with their stand up for their rights, basically. So on the one hand, I needed to kind of know what the eel might want, and on the other hand, I needed to get all these politicians to listen to me. So it's a kind of a weird position. So first of all, I thought, well, I need to meet the eel, because it's very quite dirty, dark, clouded water and brownish, and so it's a kind of a weird world underwater. So I started diving, and I met 2 eels in Amsterdam underwater. We had this kind of understanding, or at least we were there for 10-15 seconds looking at each other. So last summer I had 25 civil servants with scubas in the Amsterdam canals. They were all underwater, seeing nothing at all, but they were there. So I think I can't really prove, of course, but I think they will make their decisions maybe slightly more in favor of water life in the future.
So what if participatory design process also included other beings, even those we do not see? The whole vibrant planetary multispecies and transspecies existence, visible and invisible. How do they become co-users and co-designers?
I call myself a bacteria architect. It's connecting. The Japanese title, the architect is 建築家and 建築家 and bacteria or fungi say kin. So I am not a 建築家 but 建築家. So we make something by the bacteria and the fungi. Both very small microorganisms, so we cannot see easily. But we always live together, and except for if you don't have bacteria inside your body, we will not live anymore. But why don't think if you make an architecture, a building, making your house, why you don't consider the bacteria for your house? So usually in invisible things, you ignore the existence because you cannot see it. But I found you can feel it. I use a bacteria wall, effective microorganism, bacteria we use inside our house, inside our wall. We mixing with plaster, with hemp charcoal.
Mm-hmm.
I paste the wall and under the floor, and it ferment inside our house, inside our wall, and then other bad bacteria cannot live, like mold or bad wheels cannot live in our house because effective microorganism eat them. It's kind of we have inside our body. Inside your guts, you have many flora, bacteria, microorganisms, and it can eat bad bacteria, and they have a good balance. If the balance is bad, your health will be bad, right? And I redesigned the bacteria balance in our house. I'm designing not only a building itself, but also I design under the soil, and under the ground there are so many microorganisms in the soil, and it connects between trees and trees. But usually people destroy the network of microorganisms in order to build a building. Like so usually you use a concrete foundation, and you have to remove everything. Regenerative architecture is connecting together. So my design is not cut, but to connect to the trees and human buildings together. Then after the building completed, then the nature around the building will revive energetic more than before our construction. Under the foundation, I place the wooden pile, and the wooden pile is burnt, and the chalk, the surface is carbonized. And the carbonized surface is very easy to live fungi and bacteria because it's so porous, so many porous surface. They cannot eat anymore because it's carbonized. So they live the surface, but they cannot go inside. Then they start growing around the pile, and it grows like a network. And the tree root and our foundation, the man-made building and the tree can connect each other. It will be a strong structure under the building. Talking about regenerative architecture, the main content is a good soil. Good soil grows good architecture, and good soil grows vegetables. So it's the same.
What is a true circular system? And then it's nature, right? What is a true regenerative system? Then it's nature. And it's like, okay, well, then if we really want to do best practice circularity, best practice regenerative practice, we have to become nature again, right? So then a lot of the circularity discussions that are happening in construction is about how can we reuse building materials? And it's like, yeah, but what about the bigger question? Like, how can we make buildings that make healthy soil? Because that's the system here, right? You harvest things, everything's a harvest. I mean, I'm not so, there's a lot of weeds here, but it's like, that's just harvest. You just take that and you put it in the compost. We're also composting construction waste here because the house is made completely out of bio-based materials. So we put clay. These are clay plates. So we use this instead of gypsum plasterboard. So that's 100% clay it's reinforced with the jute textile on the back. And this you can just, break it up and put it in there. It gets wet, it turns to mush. I feed my trees with it. So this is like in the PhD that I'm writing at the moment, this is one of the kind of key ideas, which is actually like architecture as a soil making practice. Because if you have that as a kind of rubric for the whole way that you think about your practice, then it very quickly kind of steers your thinking towards, okay, well, you prefer these materials over these materials. You've probably seen this Danish building material pyramid someone's made, which is copying the food pyramid. So it's high carbon, long decomposition at the top, and low carbon, quick decomposition at the bottom. But it's even more than that, I think, which is because that's still sort of a dead system. We should use these things more and these things less. For me, it's more energizing, engaging, embodying to think about actually making soil. There's a science fiction genre which is called solar punk. So I'm trying to introduce the idea of soil punk as an alternative, because also I think like if we, in the last 2,000-3,000 years, we've been really focused on gods in the sky, and this kind of all these kind of all our kind of cosmologies are stories about how we don't belong here. We're going to return home to another place. So I'm quite suspicious of sun worship, actually, because I think what we need to be doing is worshipping the ground, yeah, being here. So soil punk. And so soil punk architecture, what is that? It's an antidote, like solar punk is to cyberpunk, all these kind of dystopian kind of almost like pornography of the apocalypse. The alternative is optimistic stories that are grounded, like Bruno Latour says, like earthbound stories.
So if our architectures are capable and willing to extend their domain to invite other than humans as co-dwellers and co-makers of spaces, what does it mean for how we think of architecture, perhaps not only as social and technological practice with its environmental dimension mostly focusing on lowest impact on nature in a dualistic human-nature separation, but as a way to extend architecture towards the horizons of genuine attention and deeper understanding of wider life processes, conscious of the needs of many? What impact might this have on the design practices, used materials, processes, but also political norms and economies, and the way we define habitation itself?
Collective narratives that generate lived storylines towards more just worlds and diverse planetary inhabitations. Stories of mutuality across heterogeneous contexts, cultures, times, and places. An open invitation to begin, always begin again, always together, to tell intimate stories of, with, on, and in this planet, on the bottom of the ocean of air.
Thanks for tuning in. In the next and final episode of this season, we turn to material gestures, looking at how we may build relationships through materials.